A warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining tonight's event. I'm speaking Leading Ladies in American Politics. My name is Christiane Püker, and I'm the director of the German American Center, or DAC, in Stuttgart. This event is a cooperation among the Heinrich Böll Stiftung Baden-Württemberg and the Center for American Women and Politics at the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University. Evening takes place on occasion of Women's History Month, which is celebrated in March, and on the day after the 8th of March, the International Women's Day. At first, a heartfelt welcome to our speaker, Kimberly Peeler-Allen. Before I will have the pleasure to introduce Kimberly, let me add a few words on the topic. At the beginning of 2021, Kamala Harris was sworn in as Vice President of the US, becoming the first woman and the first woman of color to ever hold this office. 4 years after Hillary Clinton's failed attempt to break the so-called glass ceiling on the presidential ticket, and 100 years after women were given the right to vote, the United States finally allowed a woman to take a seat at the table. So why did it take so long for a woman to become part of the ticket? Which social, cultural, and political barriers do women had and still have to overcome to become active members of the political arena? And what does the election of Harris mean to the future of women in American politics? Activist Kimberly Peeler-Allen will provide several answers to the questions. She is an expert on women's leadership and especially on Black women in the political arena. In her talk, she will focus on the causes and effects of gender inequality in politics. Kimberly has been working at the intersection of race, gender, and politics for over 20 years. She is the co-founder of Higher Heights, the leading national organization in the US dedicated to building Black women's collective political power from the voting booth to elected office. She is currently a visiting practitioner at the Center for American Women and Politics at Rutgers University, where she serves as an advisor on the Center Elections 2020 and guest lectures in various graduate and undergraduate courses. Currently, she is also working on a book called Activist MoMA, writing about Black women activists and motherhood. So welcome, Kimberly. Please let me add that already during the talk, you can use the Q&A or Frage und Antwort button to type in questions, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible after the talk. This button you can see on your screen at the bottom edge. Please note that the chat function will be disabled throughout this event, and you will not be able to turn on your microphone or your camera. Kimberly, now I'm very much looking forward to your talk. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. It is so wonderful to be here. I am here in New York, and you are in Germany, and this is one of the beauties of being in COVID lockdown, that we can have these conversations across oceans and have meaningful dialogue and collaboration. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to the conversation with all of the participants at the end. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So January 21st, 2021 felt for many in the United States and around the world like the brass ring of leadership for Black women had finally been achieved with the inauguration of Vice President Kamala Harris. It was absolutely a time to celebrate, but it was also an opportunity to look back at the road that brought us to this historic moment. It's very easy to see the election of Vice President Harris as the counterweight to the 4 years of the Trump administration. Though in many respects it is also the natural next step of the progress that was fought for by people like Sojourner Truth, and Mary Church Terrell. Black suffragettes who worked alongside people like Alice Paul and Elizabeth Cady Stanton for women's suffrage in the United States at the turn of the 20th century. To quote Vice President Harris in her nominations acceptance speech during the Democratic National Convention, "Yet so many of the Black women who helped secure that victory were prohibited from voting long after its ratification, but they were undeterred. Without fanfare or recognition, they organized, testified, rallied, marched, and fought, not just for the vote, but for a seat at the table. These women and the generations that followed worked to make democracy and opportunity real in the lives of all of us who followed." They paved the way for trailblazers like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and those women inspired us to pick up the torch and fight on. Women like Mary Church Terrell and Mary McLeod Bethune, Fannie Lou Hamer and Diane Nash, Constance Baker Motley, and Shirley Chisholm. We are not often taught their stories, but as Americans, we all stand on their shoulders. The path of Vice President Harris was paved by pioneers like Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black woman elected to Congress in 1968, and the first woman to run for president as a major party candidate in 1972, and Carol Moseley Braun, who was the first Black woman elected to the United States Senate in 1992, and the second Black woman to run for president in 2004. Women like Geraldine Ferraro, the first woman selected as a vice presidential nominee of a major party in 1984, Sarah Palin, a vice presidential nominee in 2008, and of course, Hillary Clinton, the first woman to be nominated by a major party to be president of the United States in 2016. The experiences, successes, and failures of all of these women and the millions of voters who have supported their leadership have helped grow and expand women's elected leadership in the United States. Though we are all celebrating the tremendous milestone of Vice President Harris, we must critically analyze what took us so long and how we can build on this accomplishment to create truly reflective and representative democracy. Overall, women in the US are 51% of the population, but only 26.7% of the members of Congress, 30.3% of statewide executive office holders, that would be governors, lieutenant governors, attorney generals, and treasurers, secretaries of state, 30.9% of state legislators, 23.3% of mayors of cities with a population of over 30,000, and only 27% of mayors of the 100 largest cities in the US by population. Black women are also experiencing record highs in representation, but their success also illustrates the unique challenges that they face. Over the last two election cycles, the 2017 to 2018 and 2019 to 2020 cycles, Black women have grown their numbers as candidates at all levels of office. But that increase has carried over to their success at the ballot box. The progress of 2018 and 2020 was not only the growth of Black women have seen at the ballot box. At the end of the 2016 election cycle, when many were processing the outcome of the presidential election, Black women had actually much to celebrate. 96% of Black women had voted to keep our nation moving forward. And more importantly, Black women candidates ran and won up and down the ballot. We had elected the first Black woman in 20 years to serve in the US Senate, grew the number of Black women serving in Congress to historic levels, and we saw an increase in the number of Black women in state legislatures all across the country. Between 2018 and 2019, Black women saw the largest gain in representation at the state legislative level since 1994. In 2021, their representation continues to grow, with 317 Black women serving in state legislatures, or 4.3% of the state legislators in the country. While the number of Black women in statewide executive office doubled between 2018 and 2019, from 3 to 6, Black women remain severely underrepresented at just 1.9% of all the office holders nationally. No Black woman has ever been elected governor at the state level, though the first ever major party nomination of a Black woman took place in 2018. Black women's gains in Congress continue to be consequential to the overall expansion of Black women's representation. We have a record number of Black women in the House of Representatives, or 26, or 6% of the body, when the multi-ethnic members and non-voting delegates are also included. As Black women are 7.6% of the population, we can see that we are creeping closer and closer to parity. In 2018, of the 5 Black women elected to Congress for the first time that year, 3 were the first Black women to represent their state. In 2020, of the 3 Black women that were elected for the first time, 2 were the first Black women to join their state's congressional delegation. Not only were these women the first to represent their states, in 2018, 4 of the 5 freshmen, and in 2020, 1 of the 3 freshmen were elected to represent majority white districts, which challenges the perception that Black candidates can only represent predominantly Black districts. And I'll dive deeper into that in a little shortly. Shirley Chisholm became the first Black woman elected to Congress in 1968. And since then, only 47 Black women have ever served in Congress from 21 states. Though we have achieved the first Black woman vice president, we have also lost representation in the US Senate, when only the second Black woman ever elected to the body was elevated to higher office. The 6 Black women, I just realized I'm behind in my slides. The 6 Black women that are leading our nation's 100 largest cities is down from a peak of 7 in 2019, only because the population of Baton Rouge, Louisiana declined, moving it off of the top 100 cities list. In the last 7 years, 10 Black women have been elected mayor in our 100 most populous cities. In 2014, there were only 2. These are all historic numbers, but they show how much more work needs to be done to build and support a leadership pipeline for Black women so that as they climb the leadership ladder, there is not a vacuum in their wake. In our nation's 244 years, the majority of our elected leadership at all levels of government has been white and male. The voices of Black women candidates up and down the ballot are growing louder and louder as they demand that the electorate rethink what they value in elected leaders. They're also forcing voters to think about the positive impact it has when there's a less homogeneous pool of candidates and leaders on the issues that are raised and the decisions that are made in the halls of power. These women are challenging voters to not bring their voices to that their candidacies represent to decision-making tables. It is if they are daring them to maintain the status quo. The results of those efforts are beginning to be seen at all levels of government. However, despite many voters being up for that challenge, the obstacles and barriers that women, and particularly Black women, face continue to be too much to overcome for the majority who run. Intersectional biases of race and gender that women candidates face is pervasive. Research has shown that in general, women have to work harder to prove their viability. For Black women, this is nothing new. The expression that you have to work twice as hard to get half as much is one that has been instilled in Black children by Black parents for generations. Because of that reality, Black women candidates are more times than not stepping forward, well-credentialed, with more leadership experience than their male colleagues, only to have their capabilities questioned simply because they do not fit the white male norm. We saw this in well-documented critiques of Stacey Abrams, the Democratic nominee for governor of Georgia in 2018, and Vice President Harris during her campaign for president in 2019. Party gatekeepers continue to be a substantial hurdle for women. From candidate recruitment and endorsements to strategic and financial support, parties can significantly affect candidates' likelihood of electoral success, as my colleagues at the Center for American Women in Politics have written. Of the non-incumbent Black women who ran for office in 2018, none received major institutional or gatekeeper support until it was apparent that they would win their primaries, or until they had actually won them. This fact makes their wins even more remarkable and speaks to their self-determination on the campaign trail. In 2000, it seems like some of the power brokers and gatekeepers learned lessons from 2018 and backed some of the Black women candidates earlier in their races than they had in previous cycles. The results were mixed because of the combined factors of campaigning during a pandemic and the overwhelming surge of mis- and disinformation that mobilized voters at the top of the ticket. Discussions are being had at all levels in electoral politics about how meaningful early intervention and investment and innovative campaign tactics can continue to support the growth of Black women in elected leadership. What some gatekeepers and power brokers didn't want to acknowledge then and are slowly waking up to now is that all issues are Black women's issues. Black women are small business owners, medical professionals, educators. They are mothers, they are daughters, they are wives, they are sisters, they are friends. Walking in that intersection provides a depth of life experience that allows Black women to transcend the silos of race and gender and ultimately connect with a wider coalition of voters. When thinking of the Black women who have been elected to Congress in the last two cycles, we should think beyond the fact that these would be just Black women. We sent a nurse, a teacher, 2 state legislators, a mayor of a major city, 2 community organizers, a refugee, a domestic violence survivor, a breast cancer survivor, women who have experienced homelessness, someone with a pre-existing health condition, and the mother of a slain Black boy. These women sit in committee hearings and town halls and bring the totality of their life experiences with them. If these 8 Black women bring these 11 plus identities with them every time they walk into a room, growing the number of Black women in Congress can only expand the types of identities and experiences present at decision-making tables in the halls of power. When there are more diverse voices around decision-making tables, better decisions are made and fewer are left behind. While some of the persistent hurdles to Black women's political success remain, there were also events that have helped propel Black women forward as candidates, empowering Black women to run and inspire the electorate to look beyond the status quo candidates and seek out voices that had not been previously part of the conversation. The 24-hour news cycle has brought the realities of Black Lives Matter, Say Her Name, Me Too, the inequities highlighted by the pandemic, and the racial reckoning of the summer of 2020 into the living rooms of millions of Americans. Voters are thinking more deeply than they ever have about what elected leadership looks like in this country. At the same time, Black women are embracing the totality of their life experience and recognizing the value that they bring to the political sphere. They are inspired to step off the sidelines and run for office because they understand that they know the needs of their communities and what it will take for them to thrive. As these women step forward, in many instances, their very existence is the antithesis of previous leadership. It challenges the status quo power structure that is based on patriarchy and white supremacy. In 2018, Lauren Underwood was one of those candidates. She was a former nurse and had worked on the Affordable Care Act in the Obama administration. She was born and raised in the district she sought to represent, and her parents still lived there. She was young, she was Black, and a woman, and the district was only 3% white, only 3% Black, and. Early discussions of Lauren's campaign to represent the district outside of Chicago focused on that and of her candidacy. However, she had a strong campaign plan, focused in on the fact that the incumbent had never traveled the entire district. He'd never held town halls or public events, so that was what she was going to do. She was going to show her constituents what leadership would look like if she were elected by the way that she campaigned. As primary day got closer and closer, Lauren was doing well. She was the only woman running against 5 men, and she had outraised all of them. She was beginning to pick up endorsements from a few labor unions, progressive groups, and the Chicago Tribune. But still, the major gatekeepers had not chimed in. They had endorsed in districts around Lauren's in the state of Illinois, in primaries, candidates that were no better or no worse on paper than Lauren was. But because they were white and running in predominantly white districts, and she was not, the assumption was that they could win and she couldn't. Lauren won her 6-way primary with almost 60% of the vote. The day after the election, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, otherwise known as the D-TRIP, put Lauren on their red to blue list, a list of candidates that the D-TRIP had deemed likely to flip a congressional seat and worthy of support. By mid-February of 2018, there were only a handful of states that had completed their primaries, yet there were candidates from across the country, months away from their contested primaries, that were already named to that red to blue list. The double standard here was beyond painful and would continue to be repeated throughout the cycle. But as the expression goes, she persisted. Lauren won her general election in 2018 with almost 53% of the vote. In 2020, Lauren was reelected with 51% of the vote. Her challenger continues to attempt to overturn the results of the November election, and the House Committee on Administration will adjudicate the matter in the coming weeks. In the interim, Representative Underwood continues to serve the people of Illinois' 14th Congressional District. Of the nearly 90 Black women in 2018 and 130 Black women in 2020 who ran for the House and the Senate, few, if any, received the early institutional support that their white counterparts did. None had the field cleared for them the way some of their white counterparts had the field cleared for them. Through my work as the co-founder of Higher Heights, the nation's leading organization harnessing Black women's political power from the voting booth to elected office, I had a partner organization tell me that they had decided who their candidate was going to be in a race in 2018 in mid-2016. And if the Black woman who had thrown her hat in the ring in mid-2017 had been on their radar, they may have made a different choice. But the fact of the matter is, it is extremely rare, if ever, that a majority organization seeks to recruit, train, and fully cultivate a Black woman candidate for a majority white seat. It is a struggle for many at the local party level, for local party organizations, to wrap their heads around recruiting and supporting women, let alone women of color. An extreme example of the lengths that party bosses and gatekeepers will take to maintain the status quo is the case of Jahana Haynes, who now represents Connecticut's 5th congressional district. Despite having a background that included extreme poverty, addiction, teen pregnancy, and homelessness, Jahana became Teacher of the Year in 2016, receiving the award from President Obama. The depth of her roots within her community were unquestionable. So when there became an unexpected vacancy in the 5th congressional district, Jahana had a decision to make. With just about 2 weeks before the Democratic Party convention, where party activists would vote to determine who received the Democratic line on the ballot, Jahana threw her hat in the ring. She campaigned and organized and put together a campaign apparatus very quickly, consisting mainly of her former students. And she did all that she could to prepare for the convention. At the convention, after all the votes were counted and made public on monitors around the auditorium, Jahana had won by 2 votes. There was a gasp, and then a cheer, and then the lights went out. When the lights came back on and the monitors were rebooted, Jahana had lost the convention by 3 votes. A lawsuit was immediately filed, and in depositions, party officials acknowledged that they had changed a few votes because of a verbal proxy, and that some ballots had been lost because the party official had left them in the back of their car, ignoring the chain of custody that was laid out in the party's bylaws. The case of vote tampering in Connecticut 5 was so blatant that some of those who did not support Jahana at the convention became her supporters for the simple fact that they thought she deserved a fair shot. That is all any of these candidates want: a fair shot, to have the same ballot access, to have the opportunity to present their own case to the voters without someone putting their finger on the scale working against them. In 2020, the election cycle brought a new level of attack and intimidation on Black women candidates. I just love this picture of all these women in their hearings. People like Desiree Timms, who ran to represent a congressional district in Ohio, experienced screws being put in her tires while her car was parked outside of her home, and her campaign office was shot up. Representative Ilhan Omar, a Muslim Somali refugee who was first elected in 2018, received so many threats online and to her congressional office that she has employed a private security company to protect her family. The threats reached national attention this fall when then candidate and now Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene posted a graphic on social media of herself pointing an AR-15 assault rifle at Representative Omar and other members of the squad, Representatives Ayanna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Rashida Tlaib. Capitol Police investigated the threat. Taylor Greene's social media account was temporarily suspended, and she subsequently removed the graphic, but never apologized for threatening the lives of sitting members of Congress. In a conversation with Lucy McBath during the summer of 2019, 6 months into her first term in Congress, she shared very frankly what she needed so that she could continue to do the work. The day that she was sworn in as a member of Congress, 3 Republicans filed paperwork to take her on in 2020. She said to me, "Lauren," Underwood, and I and some of the others talk about it all the time. The system was caught off guard, having all of us come in at once. We're upsetting the apple cart. We don't know how long we'll be able to stay, but while we're here, we're going to make the most of every moment and speak for those who have never had a voice. Lucy won re-election in 2020 in a rematch of her 2018 race with 54.5% of the vote. The stories of the 8 newest Black women members of Congress and hundreds of Black women across the country who have taken Shirley Chisholm's words to heart, if they don't bring you if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair, illustrates the opportunity, wealth of experience, and the added value that a truly reflective democracy and representative democracy brings. Black women have never been apathetic to the marginalization that their families and their communities face, and to the marginalization that they face themselves. Their resolve to confront that marginalization fuels Black women's political participation. We've seen it in 2018 and in 2020, and I have no doubt we will see it in 2022 as well. As Black women continue to step off the sidelines and run at every level of government, we are clear that there is so much more work to be done to bring justice, equity, and opportunity to our communities. In order for us to get, in the words of Barbara Jordan, an America that is as good as its promise, early and deep investment in Black women as candidates is essential. Calling out double standards in media coverage is vital. Recognizing the voices that are missing from conversations and demanding that they be included is critical. We are also reminded that though we are sick and tired of being sick and tired, you can pray until you faint, as Fannie Lou Hamer has told us, but unless you get up and try to do something, God's not going to put it in your lap. We must do more to create space for, as Vice President Harris stated on November 7th, 2020, for women to dream with ambition, lead with conviction, and see yourselves in a way that others may not, simply because they have never seen it before, but know that we will applaud you every step of the way.
Well, thank you so much, Kimberly, for the inspiring and very informative talk. Thank you, thank you. And yeah, I'm looking into the Q&A. And so let me just read the questions. Okay, so let me put this one. How big is progress really, for example, Harris is only vice president, and how much damage have the past 4 years done? Well, that is very precise. Do you want to answer?
Sure. I think it has created it has been progress for Black women. And part of that progress is recognizing that you have to disrupt the status quo for things to really move forward. As I mentioned, we have had 3 Black women run for president, and none of them have gotten over the finish line. But it took a white man choosing a Black woman to really move her forward. And we fully anticipate that she will be a front runner to succeed Joe Biden, whether it is after 4 years or 8 years, that she will be that front runner. And history has shown us that many vice presidents, the majority of vice presidents, who, when they have chosen to run to succeed their president, they have been successful. So I think that is a huge step forward, and also acknowledging and the now awareness and conversation about the fact that there is no Black woman in the US Senate. And how do we build a pipeline and support a pipeline? Who are the women that are in the wings that need more support, more amplification, or even just awareness that they are there, so that they are in positions to step into those opportunities. We are looking very closely at governors. In 2021, the state of Virginia has 2 Black women actively running for governor right now, and they are considered, of the top 5 candidates, 2 of them are Black women, and they are, the primary is in June, and a lot can happen between now and then, but both are in extremely great positions to run. And I think it's, like I said, it's really the awareness of who has not been part of the conversation that is a step forward. Because when we first started Higher Heights 10 years ago, no one knew the numbers, and it hadn't even crossed a lot of people's minds that there had only been, at that point in time, 1 Black woman to ever serve in the US Senate, and that we had never had a Black woman governor. So awareness is progress, and then being active to try and change those numbers is definitely a step forward. And in regard to the change in administration versus the past 4 years to where we are now, I think if the Trump administration did anything, it really galvanized and woke a lot of women up to say, you know what, I can't sit on the sidelines anymore. I am just as capable, if not even more capable, of addressing the needs of my community and running for office than anyone else. And we've seen so many women overall, and Black women in the work of Higher Heights, really just take that call and really run with it. And I think there has been an awareness and a level of engagement that I don't anticipate dissipating anytime soon. There is an activism and a level of participation from voters, from candidates, that is what a truly functioning democracy, I mean, we're not there yet, but we have taken a huge step forward, what functioning democracy actually looks like.
Mm-hmm. So it's about encouragement, of women women of color, to actually, run for a position,
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you talked about that, but there's a question, maybe, and you sum it up again. What are the main obstacles women in the U.S. face when applying for leading positions in U.S. politics and beyond? I mean, that's a general question, also talking about economics and other higher positions. Yeah.
Sure. I think one of the biggest challenges is gender norms. To be very specific, I mean, we've seen candidates. Hillary Clinton faced this when she was running for president. Someone asked her, "Well, what about your grandchildren?" You would never ask a man that as he's running for president. She would engage with her grandchildren the way grandparents engage with their grandchildren, and to pose those types of questions. And we've seen women candidates, have all sorts of questions brought about. Well, she's unmarried, so does that mean she's not likable? And if she's not likable, then why should I vote for her? Likability has nothing to do with the capabilities to do the job. So it is the double standard of sexism and misogyny that really hinder a lot of women being successful. But calling that out, I remember distinctly I had a conversation with one of my daughter's friend's parents during the 2020 election, and he was saying, "Oh, on paper, I really like Elizabeth Warren, but there's just something about her. I don't know what it is that, I don't like her, so I'm not going to vote for her." And I said, "You do realize that what you just said was very sexist.
Mm-hmm.
You said you liked her policies, you like her platform, but you're not going to vote for her because you don't like her as a person." And he caught himself and he said, "Thank you for saying that, because that I would hate for someone to say that to my daughter that you are totally capable, but because I don't really like you, you can't be successful. And that is not something that men generally have to deal with. People are, indifferent on whether or not they like or don't like someone. May say he's a real jerk and I can't stand him, but he's been great on tax reform, or he's been a great mayor and filled all the potholes, so I'm going to continue to support him. I can't stand the guy in person, but he's doing a good job. And women are just not given that same leeway.
So that's about actually, what you mentioned, the double standard, and there goes one of these questions here that is there a chance that actually what does it say? The characteristics for leaderships and are going to change, something like that.
Yeah, I think so. I think we are seeing, and this is something that has been noted over time, particularly in the U.S. Many years ago, there was a government shutdown, and the two sides in the Senate could not get it together to reopen the government. And the women of the Senate, bipartisan, got together in a conference room and hammered out a deal and were able to get party support on both sides so that the government was able to reopen. And it was really remarkable at that point in time because we had not seen women really step up or have the opportunity to lead in that type of environment. And I think women, in many cases, lead by consensus and collaboration. They are looking for the best common good for the most number of people, which brings what unfortunately has become a bad word in Washington, which is compromise. And I think there's just a different approach and level of engagement around bringing people together for the good of all that many women carry forward. And I think I talked a lot about in the legislative space and in Congress, and we're also seeing that there was a big difference in how mayors in the middle of the pandemic, mayors and governors who were women handled the pandemic and did their work to keep their cities safe and trying to keep the number of cases down, level of communication to their constituents. It was very different from many of the men who were leading these major cities or these states. So we definitely saw up close and personal, some of these mayors and governors were holding daily press conferences, so we were able to see their work. But just their approach of bringing more people into the conversation because they know what it is to be marginalized in a conversation, and being able to say, let's make sure that we are leaving as few people behind as possible.
Yeah, that's what you mentioned. They know the needs of the actually the communities they serve, and being pragmatic. And let me read this one. What do you think after all? That's more like a general question. Yeah. After all these years of emancipation, many women still do not have the courage to get politically involved. And what can we change to make it easier for women / to women of color?
Well, I think there has to be a lot of conversation around what participation looks like, just from the simple act of voting. We saw record numbers of people voting in the US in 2020 because we made it as easy as possible. And I mean, I have two children that are school aged and juggling all sorts of things in life. The easier it can be for me to vote, the more it makes it easier for me to actually do it. So we have to look at the barriers of where are our poll sites, when are committee meetings that people could participate in. and have their voice heard? Are they generally after hours when people are, dealing with their lives, or is it in the middle of the day and people aren't able to take off from work? So could we do it on a weekend, or could we rotate the time frame so that more people can participate? And then in terms of running for office, looking at these bodies that they're going into, many of these many elected positions in this country are unpaid or are paid a very small stipend. So you have to work an additional job or maybe two jobs to be able to also serve the people. Because interestingly, the mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, which is the 10th largest city in the country, that is a volunteer position.
Mhm.
That the mayor gets a small stipend. I believe it is less than $15,000 annually to do that work, to lead the 10th largest city in the country. So we have to think about how we are creating spaces for women to engage. There was a case of a woman who was a state legislator who had just given birth, and there was a critical vote that was being held. And because there was no mechanism for her to vote by proxy, she had to leave her hospital room and with her newborn to go cast her vote on the floor in person, uh, and then go back home. That is prohibitive. When you hear things like that, it makes you not want to participate. So just thinking about how do we, and its accessibility overall. It's not just for women. And I think of people like Tammy Duckworth, who is a senator from Illinois, who is a double amputee, and there are now actually a few members of Congress who have physical disabilities that there have had to be accommodations made in the chamber so that they can get around in the body. So just thinking about how are we making this, what are the barriers that we're putting up to make it harder for anyone who is not an able-bodied, cisgendered white male to participate, and thinking beyond, breaking that down will create more space for women to step off the sidelines and become really truly engaged.
Mhm. So that could be a path actually to, well, participation for everybody, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. A rising tide raises all ships.
Mhm, mhm. So the next question is, do you think that not only the public acceptance and encouragement for Black women in politics in general, but especially also the self-understanding and courage within the current and upcoming Black women generations made and make a huge difference?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. As they say, if you see it, you can be it.
Mm,
And even when Senator Harris became Senator Harris and was elected to the US Senate, we saw so many women who decided that they were going to step off the sidelines and run for a variety of offices because they saw what Kamala was able to do and it inspired them. And I think we're seeing a generation of, I guess, Gen Zs right now that are, there's two factors. A there's more women in elected leadership across the country. We are seeing more engagement of women as voters, particularly Black women, and how they have tipped the scales in many close elections. Thinking about the Alabama Senate race in 2017, the Georgia special elections this past cycle, that they have really made that difference in the electorate. And then we're also seeing they are in this confluence of moments with a racial reckoning, climate being just in the forefront of every conversation, and economic insecurity across the board, that this generation, they are really galvanized to do something because there are so many pressing issues that are part of their daily lives, and they are seeing a pathway of how they can make an impact, which is truly inspiring. Because so often, particularly when we first started doing this work, people were saying, well, my vote doesn't matter, or my engagement doesn't matter. Why should I care? But I think this generation is really seeing that they have a huge, they can have a huge impact. They have something to bring to the table, and if they don't do it, who will? I hear that a lot from Gen Zs of like, well, we don't trust that your generation, I'm a Gen Xer, or the Boomers will do anything because you haven't done anything now, so it's up to us because it's our future, not yours. It's a little harsh to take, but I appreciate that energy to make it happen.
Mhm. And to be a role model for the younger generation. Yeah. So that was one question here connected to this. Do you think once the glass ceiling is broken, it makes it easier for the younger generations? Yeah, I mean, yes. Or what would you say?
Yeah, it does and it doesn't. I think there is definitely a path forward. There is a roadmap that is created, but we also know that the pendulum swings both ways. So similarly to we had President Obama's administration, and immediately after he was elected, we had the rise of the Tea Party, and there was that current running against him, and we got President Trump, and as soon as he was elected, he wasn't even sworn in yet. The groups like Indivisible and so many other organizations cropped up, and people became really activated and organized to be the countercurrent to Trump, and we got the Biden Harris ticket as we have a woman breaking through as the counterbalance to the Trump administration, and I'm sure that will that ebb and flow will continue to happen, but with every time the bell moves forward and moves back, you still are making incremental progress. So I'm hoping that over time we will continue to see growth, particularly at the state legislative level and in our governors and in our mayors, because what we have definitely seen over the last year through the pandemic, how much happens at the state and local level that has just such a profound impact on the day-to-day lives of Americans, and having those diverse voices around those decision-making tables will help ensure that that there is, whatever happens in Washington, that there is some sort of counterbalance or accountability in place at the state and local level.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, and there's one more question. Campaign trails often include stereotypical activities such as manning the grill to show that they are just like us. Yeah. Do you think that will change with more female candidates running? Or how will traditional gender roles play into that?
Yeah, I think it will be. We've seen the people going to the Iowa caucuses, and you have to get a deep fried Oreo or whatever it is that they eat there as part of the process. And yes, absolutely, you have to show or have traditionally had to show the traditional gender roles and reinforce that. I think of I guess it was back in 1980 when Ronald Reagan was first running for president, and there was this whole video shoot of him chopping some wood. And then it was perpetuated or continued by George W. Bush out on his ranch chopping some wood because he's a manly man. And I think as we're seeing more and more women step into leadership, there is an opportunity to reshape what how people portray their humanity. and the totality of their experience. Like we saw Senator Harris really leaning into the fact that she went to a historically Black university and is a member of the nation's oldest Black sorority, where she was seen with her sorority sisters doing some of their traditional stepping and doing things that were very comfortable to her, where she was, she is a great cook, and people talk, when she was in the Senate, people would talk about, oh, Kamala's cooking, so we all have to go by her condo. So she was cooking on Instagram and still gives out recipes and things like that, which to a certain degree definitely continue to perpetuate the traditional gender roles. But I think it's also looking to see, where are people showing up in their community. We saw, are you, if you are on the right side of the aisle, are you showing up at a Trump rally? Are you seen at a Trump rally? If you're on the left side of the aisle, were you at a Black Lives Matter march? What are you doing? Are you speaking? What is your impact, and how are you really resonating with the people that you are trying to court? What are the things beyond the traditional gender roles, but what are your actual actions? Which I think is great, because it's really focused closer to a policy conversation rather than a beauty pageant.
Yeah. And so slowly we come to Kamala Harris, but before, let me ask another question. Studies show that companies are more likely to be successful when they work towards gender equality. Yeah, so can this also be applied on a political level? And if so, why is a change in this perspective not actually seen yet?
Yeah, people point to those studies all the time as the case for diversifying voices around the decision-making tables, including more women, including more people of color, and it is, unfortunately, we are in a political system that is so entrenched in patriarchy that in some cases you have to literally rewrite the rules of how politics works, from ballot access to how people cast their vote, how ballot measures get on the ballot. We have to completely revamp how we approach civic participation to get more women, more women of color, more people of color to those decision-making tables. And I think it requires more work than some are willing to put in. There's definitely always the time that people will say, well, I just want to do just enough to say that I did something, but not enough to actually change the rules. Because if I change the rules, then I am changing the power structure, which leaves me out. And instead of seeing that as an opportunity to uplift others and bring equality and equity to more groups, it is very much about how do I preserve preserve my power structure. And that is something that is not just based for around male leadership, but we also, in many of our elected bodies, there are not term limits. So it is an incumbency protection program where there are people who have been in office for years and years and years and years and years, and have not necessarily been serving their constituents well, but because of how the rules are written and how the power brokers play their games, it makes it next to impossible to unseat an incumbent. And I think we see something like 92% of incumbents in bodies without term limits are reelected time and time again. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think corporate America has really led the way, and the political sphere definitely has a lot of work to catch up. Thinking about NASDAQ, the NASDAQ exchange just announced a few weeks ago that for any entity to be traded on their exchange, you must have, I think, at least one woman and at least one person of color as part of their board of directors. So that is a concrete structural change that that could be really worthwhile in changing what elected leadership looks like in the U.S.
Mhm, mhm. And there's one question that maybe adds a little bit, but on a local level, yeah. Can you share some suggestions for things that we can do locally to build the movement towards more women in politics? Maybe that comes from the States, that question.
Well, I think at the local level, at all levels, it is looking at who represents you. What are the, are you pleased with that leadership? If you are not, who are the people who are out doing the work that you agree with? Chances are they are women, chances are they are people of color. And what can you do to support them to elevate their leadership? If there is an upcoming election, encourage them to run for office, and then not just say, oh, you should run, but put some skin in the game. Will you make a contribution? Will you volunteer hours? Will you talk about the race on social media? If they are, many women are saying, well, I can't run for office because there's so many things going on in my life, and I have my children and my parents, and I have a job, and all of the things. And saying, okay, I will help you by taking on this piece of your life. And that is, there was a number that was floated around for many, many years that for a woman to run for office, she had to be asked 7 times, which we haven't been able to, for years at COP, we've been trying to figure out the science behind that. But I think it was really kind of anecdotal, but it's part of that ask. It's the person who first puts that seed in a woman's mind saying, you have leadership potential. There's that second person who says there is an opportunity and we need your voice. There's the person who says, there is a pathway for you. There's the person that says, I will help you on that pathway. And then there's also the person that also is part of that conversation who says, I will help you govern. I will help you lead. And all of these things and I will help you, I will support your family structure. That I will help you in your social circles. All of these pieces have to kind of fall into place for many women for them to feel comfortable enough to put themselves out there as candidates. And as we have seen, because of the advent of social media and the hyper-partisan place we are in as a country, women are, and particularly women of color, are subject to far more scrutiny, far more attacks than their white male counterparts. So they really have to have that, or know that they have that support behind them, as well as be very clear in their minds of the impact that they want to have. I've talked to, I remember I was speaking to Desiree during her campaign when she had the screws in her tires outside of her house, which was not an address that was public, and right on the heels of having her campaign office shot up. And she said, they're trying to scare me, but I'm not going to give them that power. I know what my community needs. I know that I have something to give, and they're not going to deter me. And I was just so proud of her and just so amazed, because I don't know if I would have had that same strength, but it is that commitment to create the change we want to see in the world that so many women have when they decide to run for office that helps them get past or get through a lot of the challenges that they face.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. And you talked about, kind of quotas. So this question is, could quotas be a solution?
They could be. They could be. You know, in America, we don't like the word quota. It has,
Well,
you know,
neither do we like it here in Germany.
but I think there is, I think there's definitely something that needs to happen. There are a lot of organizations right now that are having conversations about how do we, get to parity with 51% of our elected leaders being women. And there are many people who say that the only way that we do that is by the structural change of and instituting quotas. We are rugged individuals over here, and we like to say, well, we want the best person. Yeah, but if you are using the same guideposts that measure a wealthy white man. I didn't put that in there before, but there's definitely a huge economic factor in whether or not a candidate is deemed viable or worthy of support. And I think once we if we were to institute some quotas around leadership, and that could create the structural change that is needed to make sure that more voices are part of the conversation. So the verdict is still out. I'm still studying it immensely. There are several organizations that send me briefings regularly of like these are the numbers. This is how it could be impactful. And I think just making sure that instituting things like quotas, that it is done in a way that lifts up not just women, but also has a focus on marginalized communities, whether they are indigenous, whether they are disabled, women of color. There has to be that focus, because I think what many people are afraid of, particularly on the left, that if we institute quotas, we will just end up with a bunch of wealthy white women and a bunch of wealthy white men, and it'll be 50-50, but the marginalized voices will still be left in the cold. So it's all in how it is implemented.
Probably. Do you think a Republican Black female candidate would have better chances to get elected, into a higher office than a Black Democratic candidate?
Well, historically, the majority of the Black women who have run for office, particularly at the federal level, have been Democrats. We have elected one Black woman Republican, Mia Love, who served the state of Utah I think she served 2 terms in Congress, but she is the only Black woman who has been elected on the Republican side of the aisle. This past cycle, out of the 130 Black women who ran for the House and the Senate, in 2020, I think there were 24 Black Republican women who ran, and I think there were more in the primaries, but there were 24 who were on the ballot in the general election, but none of them were successful. So I think there is, the Republican Party. If you look at the numbers, they have. Their parity numbers. If you split the parity between, or the parties between the Democrats and the Republicans, the Democrats have elected far more women and women of color than the Republicans have currently and historically, and definitely for people of color as well. So there is definitely a conversation that needs to be had on the Republican side of the aisle about their women's representation, their levels of representation, and how they recruit and support women to run for office.
Mm-hmm. And now turning to Kamala Harris. Just a general question, yeah. What will change, in your opinion, regarding women in politics due to the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? Yeah.
Well, I think we will continue to see more women step off the sidelines because the trail has been shown. We haven't gotten the ultimate the ultimate brass ring of a black woman as president, but we can see that we are closer to that than we have ever been in our nation's history, with Vice President Harris being second in command. So I think there is definitely that. I think the conversation and the policies that the Biden administration, it is the hope, it is what they have telegraphed throughout the campaign and in the early days of their administration, that the focus on communities that have been left behind is a top priority for their administration, and many feel that having Senator Harris as part of that, as part of the cabinet, and as Joe Biden said during the campaign, the last person that he talks to before every decision, he wants that to be her. And I think that will definitely have an impact on the policy decisions of the administration. I know it has, there are active conversations about how we support pipelines for Black women candidates, Black women in civic participation, and that focus of having someone that we can point to is definitely a guiding star for us, that should, and I believe will have a lasting impact for generations to come.
Mm-hmm. 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 And this is a question about the agenda. Well, it's hard to see right now. What, if any, agenda Kamala Harris has of her own as vice president? Is there one?
Not that I have been able to ascertain. I think she is very much, particularly the first, 100 days of this administration is, primarily focused on the response to the pandemic, and her work. I think as they get past the as we get more and more people vaccinated, and as businesses and schools begin to reopen, which we hope to be by the end of this year, I think we will start to see more of her kind of fingerprints on policy. I mean, we know, particularly from her time in the Senate, that she has taken on some criminal justice reform issues. She has taken on civil rights issues, but beyond that, she also is, the legal. The attorney, the Justice Department. I mean, there was a lot of conversation of like, should she be VP or should she be Attorney General? We were kind of torn on that, or could she go to the Supreme Court? There were a lot of possibilities, which was really exciting. But I think it also just shows the breadth of experience that she has and places where she can have some meaningful impact. I think there is a lot that she can do. The challenge will be, what will she focus on to be able to have some real impact, some things that she can point to, and also be very supportive of the administration along the way, because that is, also the challenge that I don't think, because she is the first woman, there's already been some critique that I think unfairly thrown at her, that she is, trying to make a name for herself, and she's already angling and to run for president, so she's going to go off the rails and do her own thing. And I don't think that that's fair. I don't think that what she has done thus far as vice president it's any indication that she has done that. And I don't think her behavior and her actions are any different than any other new vice president, and who has been a man. And no one said that any of them were being too ambitious and trying to usurp the power or the prestige of their president. So I think that is an unfair standard that is being put upon her because she is a woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you were talking about the very diverse backgrounds of the female politicians before in your talk. And now this question gets to that's critical, can Kamala Harris actually represent working class women, or is she just a symbolic female figure?
Well, I think she can. I think there is, she was raised by a single mother and understands the challenges there. And I think you know, there is a wide variety of her experience. She, as not a public defender, a district attorney in the city of San Francisco. ADAs don't make a lot of money. And yes, she does have a law degree, but I think there is and her experience engaging with the people that she served when she was in San Francisco in the DA's office and then elevated to district attorney, that give her a perspective that that many don't necessarily have. And there is also this expectation that you must have the lived experience to be able to speak to it, where often we are adjacent to an experience or have close friends and family who have gone through various challenges that inform our decision makings and don't make our experiences any less valuable. And I think she, has an opportunity to bring her experience from the district attorney's office and as attorney general in the state of California to this office, to the vice presidency, in a way that many people will identify with.
Mm-hmm. Now we come closer to the $1 million question. Do you think the US are ready for a women president?
Yes, that is always the question, and it was a discussion that was front and foremost in the 2020 cycle. We had the most diverse field on the Democratic side than we had ever had. We had more women running than we have ever had, and they were extremely well qualified to run. And I think there is. We have a lot of work to be done. I am hopeful that, similar to the thought that we, would never have a black man as president. I remember in 2008 when the primary came down to Hillary Clinton, John Edwards, and Barack Obama. I remember saying to a friend of mine, I guess the nominee is going to be John Edwards because there's no way that the party is going to nominate a woman or a black man to be president. And John Edwards was, I think probably 2 months after I made that statement, John Edwards was out of the race. And it went on to, to go down to the convention between a black man and a woman. So I think there's, there is opportunity. And I think we are continuously having the conversation about what does leadership look like and having the critical self assessment of what our standards are, what are our expectations, and like the conversation I had with my daughter's friend's father, and really saying, what am I really saying here? Why am I really thinking that? And doing that self-interrogation around race and gender norms that will continue to push the envelope. So I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, and maybe that fits. What is what's your take on the suggestion that Joe Biden may not want to serve his 4 year presidency at all, but plans actually to hand over the office to Kamala Harris? So that's already said.
I know that is definitely a narrative that is floating around on the internet and in chat rooms. I don't see any indications that that is the case. I think, should, God forbid, anything happen to Joe Biden and he is not able to fulfill his term, that the vice president would be perfectly capable and willing and able to step into that position. But I don't see it as any sort of grand conspiracy that that he will step down to allow her to run. I think this is something that Joe Biden has wanted for a very, 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 very long time, and he will make the most of every moment of it. And his full 4 years, and possibly another four after that. But we will see. But we will see. But I fully expect that he will serve a full 4 years for his term.
Yeah. So thank you. Well, we are coming to an end, but there is one. Oh, that's I have to ask you that. Do you think political education, so that's really different now, for younger people can make a difference? And if yes, how?
Oh my goodness, I love this question. I love this question.
Ask it.
Because it's one of the things that I think is unfortunately has led us to this point of hyperpartisanship, and has let the conspiracy theories on both sides of the aisle just abound, because people don't understand civics. They don't understand how the process works, how a bill becomes a law. And when civics was removed from core curriculum in the United States, it was just a downfall. I was lucky enough that I got that critical civics instruction in my education, and had some phenomenal teachers in middle school and in high school that really made me really understand how you could have impact, how the process worked, how it impacted my daily life. And that is something that people just don't understand. We have conversations with people all the time about, well, just asking questions that, because they just don't understand the branches of government. They don't understand, or it's not made clear to them, what is a local issue, what is a state issue, what is a federal issue, and who represents them at those various levels, and to be able to fix the things that they need. I've worked for years with a New York State senator here, and he was like, the number of people who call me for potholes is astounding. I am a state senator. I don't do potholes. I just immediately turn them over to the city council member who works through the city council with the Department of roads, and they do the potholes. But people just don't understand which levers to push, and most importantly, how to effectively raise their voice and make their concerns heard. And lastly, and I think most importantly, is that the fact that our elected officials, all of them, work for the people. We don't work for them. And we have to hold them accountable. We have to let them know when we're not happy with what they're doing. But most importantly, we have to praise them when we do agree. Because some of these positions that legislators take, or mayors take, or chief executives take, are very lonely and very difficult positions. When you are in leadership, as they say, the buck stops here, and it can be a very lonely road. But to have a note from a constituent saying, I really appreciate how you stood up for us, how you fought for us, can go a long way. And more importantly, I know that there's this other issue is coming down the line, and I wish you would continue to advocate on our behalf on this issue. And it's very simple, but it requires participation, and it requires engagement, and it requires education to understand how all of this works together. And it absolutely has to be back in schools for us to really have a functional democracy. There are so many people who are doing clinics on their own of teaching adults about civics and how the process works. And there's a lot of conversations around reapportionment or redistricting that are coming up now in this country, because we just completed our 10-year census, and the district lines of all of our state legislatures and congressional districts are being drawn, and that determines resources, that determines representation, and understanding what that process is, who is at the table that actually draws the maps block by block, street by street, is very important, because then you want to know how people are deciding what you have the opportunity to vote on, who do you have the opportunity to vote for. So there's so much that needs to be done to educate and inform and mobilize our electorate. Some say that it is a strategic conspiracy to remove civics from the school system, so that the electorate does not participate, to perpetuate the status quo. And I think there may be something to that in some respects, but I think there is we must push back and inform ourselves, and for government to work, for the democracy to work, we must have an engaged and active electorate.
Mm-hmm. So again, education is the key, and understanding of the processes. So thank you so much, Kimberly.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Thank you for answering all the questions so thoughtfully. We had a lot today. Really.
Of course. No, I love that. If I speak to a group and there are no questions, I didn't do my job.
So obviously you did a great job, and I can tell you I'm so grateful, and thank you so much. And obviously there still is a long way to go for true gender equality, also in politics, and especially for also women of color. But maybe we can put it in this way, or I can put it that there is a silver lining there.
Yes. Absolutely.
At least.
Absolutely.
And I also, of course, want to thank our listeners and questioners for their participation, as well as our colleagues from the cooperating Heinrich Böll Stiftung and Rutgers University, and also to my DATS colleagues Max Hahnemann and Katrin Büttner for the technical support. It's always so helpful to have you. And finally, a bit of event publicity. I can't help it. Next week, on Thursday, March 18th, you can join us, can join a digital talk organized by our colleagues at the America House Munich, in cooperation with the German American Centers in Germany. And it will be a talk with Dr. Cynthia Miller-Idris on how to understand and combat far-right extremism. And the week after, the DAZ is offering, together with cooperation partners, 2 exciting events. And one of them will be a film screening on diversity and the role of women in the past and future of space exploration. So something different, but it also deals with gender equality. Please check out our website and our social media outlets. So finally, may I wish you all a wonderful evening. Stay healthy.